Welcome to Understanding Islam, Series 2. This week we're going to be looking at the Shia understanding of the Imams as spiritual guides. Now we need to remind ourselves first of all that the term Imam has three different uses in speaking about Islam. First of all, we have the person who leads the prayers when they meet in congregation, and there are hundreds of thousands of these people around the world. Secondly, we have the Imam as a scholar of outstanding esteem whose teaching plays a dominant part in the history of Islam, like Imam al-Ghazali, for example, or one of the Imams who established one of the law schools. The third usage is the one that we're going to be using today, and that is the Imam, the divinely appointed leader and guide of the community in succession to the Prophet. And this is a particular Shia usage of the term, and we're going to be looking today at this question from a Shia perspective. And if you want to go back and look at more historical and theological dimensions of this, then you can go back to Series 1, and the last two episodes there give us some more information on this question. If we think about it, all human beings on the one hand are equal. They are all called equally to live a life of worship and obedience to God. Each one of us stands alone before God. All human beings are equal in the sight of God. On the other hand, human beings, if we think about it, are not all equal in terms of their intelligence, for example. Some people are more intelligent than others. Some people are more spiritually gifted than others. Some people are more disciplined and are leaders, and others are more followers. So in this sense, we can see that there are different degrees here amongst human beings. And when we're talking about the Imams, we are talking about people of the highest spiritual excellence, people whose whole lives become a manifestation of a godly way of life. We can see then that human beings need guidance. The ordinary masses of people like you and me need other people to guide us. People of the highest spiritual excellence. Now, where does this guidance come from? Well, it comes from the revelations which are sent, the books like the Quran. It comes from the prophets who are sent to guide humankind to put that teaching into practice, like Prophet Muhammad. And we know that from Adam until Muhammad, we have a huge chain of prophets all the way down through human history, so that to every people a prophet has been sent. Sometimes, though, the Quran refers to some of these prophets by two names, both prophet and Imam. So, for example, Abraham is called both prophet and Imam. What is the difference? Well, the Imams then are seen to be people who not only have the revelation from God, but also they are the ones who implement that in political and in practical ways within the community. Just in the same way, if we think back to the Quranic story about Moses, we know then that Moses says to God that he needs a co-worker. and his brother Aaron, Harun, is declared to be also a prophet. And he is to be the wazir. He is to be the co-worker, the minister, the one who will lead the community after Moses. In the same way, we see that Jesus gathers around him an inner circle under the leadership of Simon Peter, and that he will lead the community after the time of the prophet Jesus. Now let's take that model forward and look into the time after Prophet Muhammad. In Shia understanding, human beings need not only a guide, but an infallible guide, a guide who is sinless and without error, so that we have the presence of someone who will help us to put the teaching into practice in a perfect way, without any confusion, without any error. If we didn't have such guides, then we would necessarily go astray. And if that was the case, God would be unjust. God would fail to give us the necessary guidance to live in a godly way. So it is a logical part of the system of God's justice and mercy that God will provide sinless, infallible guides to guide the rest of humankind. Who needs them? Well, all human beings need them. The whole earth needs this kind of guidance. Therefore, in Shia understanding, from the time of Adam onwards, the earth has never been without a sinless, infallible guide to guide the masses of humankind in a godly direction, and it will continue this way until the end of human life upon earth, with the last of these Imams, the last of these spiritual guides, being Imam al-Mahdi. The Quran actually speaks about this guidance. It says you are to obey God, and then you are to obey the Prophet Muhammad, and then you are to obey those persons placed amongst you of authority. These are understood to be the Imams, and they are to lead the community after Prophet Muhammad. Where do they get this guidance from? Well, they get it from three sources. First of all, they get it from the book, from the Quran itself. Secondly, they receive the guidance, of course, through the teaching of Prophet Muhammad. But thirdly, the Imams are possessed of a guiding light, a light from God which indwells them and guides them with certainty and with surety to the right path. So it is the inner light which enables them to interpret and to give guidance based on these two earlier sources. Now, just in the same way that the prophets are without sin and without error, and are given the confidence, the assurance by their knowledge of things that the rest of us can't know, so the Imams also are without sin, without error, and have this inner assurance by the divine gift of light that they have knowledge which is unavailable to the rest of us. In Shia understanding, before God created the rest of creation, God created a light. And this light is to become the light of prophethood. And this light indwells each of the prophets from Adam down to Muhammad. And it comes to its final resting place in Muhammad. It is the light of prophethood, or the light of Muhammad, the Nur Muhammadi. But we're told also that this light separated into two parts before the creation began. And it was the second of these parts which indwelt the Imams, which comes to its final resting place in Imam Ali. Now, it was this light of God which was actually the cause and the instrument for the creation of the rest of the creation. It is God's tool, it is God's agent, which is actually the creative force. These two lights, then, are united in the womb of Fatima. Fatima is the daughter of Prophet Muhammad, and she is also the wife of Imam Ali. And therefore, when she becomes pregnant with her two sons, Hassan and Hussein, it is as though these two lights are fused into one in her womb, and the subsequent Imams then are the bearers of this fused light. And each of the Imams, subsequently Hassan, Hussein, and down through the chain, are the bearers of this inner light of knowledge. Prophets receive a special gift from God. It is the gift of revelation, or wahi. This is direct, literal revelation from God in the form of a scripture or a book. This closes with the death of Prophet Muhammad. Once the Quran has been fully revealed, that is the end of this form of direct literal revelation from God. But there is another form of divine inspiration or instruction from God, guidance from God, which is spoken of in the Quran. This, we're told, is given to the mother of Moses, to guide her to seek out the infant Moses and protect him. It is given to Mary, the mother of Jesus. It is also given to the bee, and these three references are all there in the Quran. Now, this light of guidance is called ilham. Inspiration, it's sometimes translated. Inspiration comes from, as it were, the breathing of the Spirit. Inspire. To breathe the Spirit into the person to give them intimate guidance and knowledge that can come only from God. So the Imams are the bearers of ilham, this spiritual knowledge and guidance which is different from that which comes to the Prophet, but is nevertheless a divinely inspired gift, giving them knowledge, giving them certainty, so that they can guide the remainder of humankind. We can say then that prophets receive exoteric guidance, that is, the outer guidance, the coming of a sharia, of a law, of a set of code of living that can be passed on to people. But the Imams have the gift of an esoteric guidance, that is, a hidden guidance, the inner dimensions, how to interpret the external guidance of the Quran. This is particularly important because the Quran says of itself that some verses are easy and obvious to explain and to understand, but other verses are more metaphorical or more ambiguous. Now, if people who don't have this inner light of guidance from God try to interpret these verses, they are likely to go astray and to go into confusion and error. And so only those who have this inner gift of ilham, this gift of divine inspiration, can correctly interpret those ambiguous verses and thus guide humankind aright. Therefore, we can see that the Imams are an essential requirement for humankind. We're also told that there were other earlier writings, that Prophet Muhammad himself left a book of his own guidance for his family. We're told also that after his death, Jibril, came to his daughter Fatima and gave her wisdom and knowledge. And so these two books were also there within the family to give additional knowledge about the way of Islam, the interpretation of the Quran. We're told, for example, that the Imams know the greatest name of God, which has not yet been revealed to the rest of us. Once we have this understanding of the nature of the Imams, then Shia scholars have gone and understood various references in the Quran to refer to the Imams. So we begin to read the Quran through this perspective. We're told, for example, that the Imams are the signs of God, that they are the straight path, that therefore one must follow the Imams to follow the straight path to paradise. They are the bounty or the blessing of God. They are the firmest handle, the rope of God. The Quran says, hold on fast to the rope of God and you will not go astray. Therefore, hold fast to the teaching of the Imams, and in that way you will not go astray and you will be brought to paradise. They are the light of God. They are the trust. They are the guides of humankind, the possessors of knowledge and the possessors of authority. And indeed, there are many references in the Quran which have been read by the Shia scholars to be references, we can say oblique or hidden references, pointing toward the Imams, which fill out our understanding of who they are and the function that they perform within the life of the Muslim community and within the life of humanity. If you want to take somebody as your guide, if you want to follow someone's wisdom and instruction, then you need someone who is an infallible guide, someone who is without sin. It would be a foolish person who followed a sinful guide, or somebody who merely had human knowledge. Therefore, the Imams are understood to be masum. That is, they are without sin and they are infallible, without error. And they are created such from the beginning of their lives until their very end. Although they only become the Imam when they are designated by their predecessor by God's command. So it's not that any human being elects the Imams. It is not that one Imam chooses and decides who should be the Imam afterwards. The Imams are divinely appointed, and each Imam is inspired by God, instructed to announce the name of the Imam who is to follow. Where did the Imams get this knowledge from? Well, some of this knowledge is accumulated. If we think of Ali, for example, Ali is the first male Muslim. He lives the whole of his life as the constant companion of the Prophet, together with, of course, his wife, Fatima, who is the Prophet's daughter. So they are on intimate terms with the Prophet throughout the whole of his public ministry from the time of the coming of the Quran onwards. Therefore, Ali is constantly accumulating knowledge of the life of the Prophet, of how he put the guidance of the Quran into practice, and is best placed to be questioning the Prophet to understand the inner meaning of things that are not clear. And in this way, he accumulates this knowledge from the Prophet, together with Fatima, and then the two of them teach it to their sons, to Hassan and Hussein. And so it goes on down the chain of the Imams. But when we come to the 9th and 10th Imam, they actually inherit the mantle of the Imamate whilst they're children. And so here we have a kind of miraculous transfer, a kind of infusion of this accumulated knowledge to the Imams. Now, you can imagine that if you have the authoritative word of the infallible Imam, that is all the proof that you need that whatever they are saying is authentic and true. So when it comes to the hadith which are accepted within the Shia traditions, then if a hadith is affirmed and acknowledged by one of the infallible Imams, that is proof positive that it did indeed come from the Prophet himself. And even an Imam who is born after the death of Prophet Muhammad still possesses this inner knowledge, this divine light, this infallibility to be able to give the assurance that yes, this is an authentic hadith. They are in this sense the proof of the hadith of the Prophet. They are indeed called the proof of God. This gives the Shia community the privileged position of an additional 300 years of guidance after the death of the Prophet, guidance from the infallible, sinless Imams. There are some of the hadith of the Prophet that give us an idea about the importance and centrality of the Imams in the life of the community. We're told, for example, that the stars of the heavens guide sailors safely to their port. And in the same way, the Imams are like stars that guide the community safely on their journey to paradise. In the same way, this theme is intensified with the notion of salvation, and the parallel is given that just as the Ark of Noah saved those who took refuge and entered into it, so the Imams will be like an ark of salvation to those who take refuge and stay close to their teaching. Therefore, they become the vehicle of salvation and the vehicle of the forgiveness of God. Ali himself is spoken of as the Wali, and the Imams are also spoken of as Wali. We then have the doctrine of Walaya. This term Wali becomes important because it has two meanings. It can mean the master, but also the friend. So the Imams are to be the masters, those who are to be obeyed and who are to be followed, but they also become the friends of the believers, the friends who will guide people to salvation, not only in this life. In this life, they are the channels through which the grace of God comes to the earth, comes to human beings. They are the channels for the hidden knowledge that God gives them. But also on the day of judgment, they become the friends of the believers. They intercede with God for those who have placed their trust in them. And so, as master and friend, they play an intimate part in bringing the believer safely to their destination of paradise. A crucial date in the history of understanding the Imams is the year 941, because in this year the 12th Imam goes into a total hidden existence, the greater occultation, we say. From this time onwards, he cannot be accessed by human beings for guidance. And yet he is not absent. He is not dead. He is not inactive. If the world were left without the guidance of an Imam, then it would go into chaos. So in some way that we can't really understand, the 12th Imam is still constantly exercising that function of guidance in the earth today. And the model here which is given is a useful one. We can see the sun, and then the sun disappears behind the clouds and is hidden from our sight. And yet we know that the sun is still present behind the clouds, even though we can't see the sun. And we know that the sun is still shedding the rays upon the earth, bringing warmth and bringing light, and thus enabling life to continue upon the earth. Without the presence of the sun, all life on earth would end. Without the presence of the divinely appointed Imam, human beings would necessarily go into chaos and confusion. The 12th Imam is, at this stage, the hidden Imam, but also the Imam of the present age. He serves this function today. At some future date, we know not when, he will re-emerge from his occultation, from his hidden existence, and then he will be known once again by people upon the earth. Obviously, this is something for which the Shia Muslims will pray, that God may hasten the return of Imam al-Mahdi and bring that blessed day when he will be there in our midst and people can turn to him and receive his guidance in a direct way during this period that we call the end of time, leading up to the end of the world. Join me next week when we'll be looking at the Quran as the Word of God and the place that plays in the heart of the believer. I look forward to seeing you then.